I'm Kristof Van Tomme, and welcome to the API Resilience podcast. If you've ever wondered what it really is we do when we do APIs, and if you've wondered how APIs change organizations, our communities, and our society, look no further. This is the podcast you've been searching for. Welcome to the API Resilience podcast. Today, I've got two amazing guests from Verizon. I've got Alicia Miller and Joshua Markham, and we're going to be talking about the future of telcos and how things are evolving and all the exciting stuff both of them are working on. But before we really deep dive, I'd like to ask maybe to give a very short introduction. Who are you and what are the kind of things that you're working on?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. Alicia Miller. I sit currently in our corporate strategy team at Verizon. My focus is on industry development, and I work a lot with external industry groups, so GSMA, the Linux Foundation's Camara project, and I spend my time thinking about interoperable network APIs and how we can really drive adoption of those APIs with developers.
Thank you, Alicia. Joshua?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Kristof. Good talking to you again. I'm in IoT developer relations, and so we're working on a couple of things. We're working on docs, which we're always kind of working on docs, right? We're doing QA work, which we always do QA work for new capabilities coming out. And now we're starting to, think and work on the future, right? Because everything's going to be an API, right? And modernization going on in the telco space.
This is the really exciting stuff because one of my pet peeves last, couple of years is so I got really excited about Worley mapping, which is this methodology for kind of trying to map out where the future is going and how technology is evolving and kind of trying to predict how things are going to evolve. And one of the core things that is as part of Worley mapping is this idea that everything is always evolving towards utilities. And when I'm looking at the API landscape, everybody's still talking about APIs or products. And one of the questions I've been asking myself is, what will it take to truly transform these products into utilities? And that's why I think both of you're working on. So what you're working on is like a new set of interoperable standards that basically is creating a new layer of APIs that are becoming a utility for doing really advanced stuff with mobile networks. I think this is how I understand what you're doing, and from what I've been reading of the standards. I think for you, Joshua, it's about creating this network of things, the Internet of Things, where devices also just are constantly connected and there's this need of turning like the real unlocking of the value of all these services, I think will come when we can change this from a one-off integration to something that consistently can be done and that can be automated using LLMs. So we'll talk a little bit about that also at a later point. But there's that shift that is coming. Is that also how you're experiencing it? Like, do you have people talking to you about APIs as products, or have you thought about this shift towards more of a utility game? Also, even if you have a utility, you will still have service products on top of the utility. So it doesn't mean that there's no margins. That's not what it means. It's a new layer of complexity on top of a bunch of standards that are enabling a bunch of new things to happen. What this sparks in you? Because it's a topic that's very, very deep, or it's very close to my heart, and I'm very excited about it because I think this is where, this is the next evolution in APIs. The first one was going from one-to-one integrations, then API as a product, which is like one side is productized and the other side is still like custom integrations. You're still building apps. And now the next thing is, okay, all these capabilities that we're providing through APIs, when they become utilities, when that becomes really like plugging in the electricity and it just magically works. Is this something you're busy with your teams? Is this on the horizon, or what does this spark?
We've been doing APIs for over a decade when it comes to IoT devices, right? And a big portion of it is utility just to be able to do business, right? So in the IoT space, it's kind of millions by pennies, right?
Yeah.
So because the margins are low, we have to lower our carrying costs to do business with us. And we have to lower our customers' operational costs, right? And the best way to do that is through automation. So 9 times out of 10, my team's talking to a customer about, using a specific API to be able to do X, Y, or Z. And sometimes we've got 3 APIs that can do it. So what does that become? And then I think over the past couple of years, we've taken it out of just the doing business with us into, what is the device doing right now? What is the state of the device? What is the state of the network? And so the last developer day we did was really about kind of an end-to-end look at an IoT application, and not low power, but 5G. And then also, in the cloud world, we do all of this tooling and optimization and orchestration, and we're really looking at observability. And so what we're trying to get our customers to do now is start consuming our APIs. And keep them in some of that same tools that you already know, where you're looking at the health of your application. But now let's start looking at the health of the network to be able to do that. And in some part, you may want to ask a question of what does the device think of the network, but you also may want to ask, what does the network think about the device? However, that's for someone who pretty much owns the end-to-end service that they're building on. Whereas what Alicia's working on is there's another piece of how does a third party utilize services that will unlock being able to do things that we know make sense, but we just can't do it today. And a big portion of that is being able to do it securely. When somebody calls an API on my side of the house, they've gone through authentication. I look at it as both are highly needed. It's one of those big things of being able to offer services securely that makes sense for the business and for our customers.
I had a conversation about this last week with Stephen Wilmot. I don't know if you know him. He was with the organizer of API Strats. He's now working together with Kinlane on APS JSON, which is an open format for API catalogs, which is really exciting because I think it's one of the standardization efforts that are necessary to create the utility. And this is why I think what you're doing, Alicia, in helping different telcos to standardize on the same APIs, this is the essential piece of creating utility, because without standards, you don't have utility. The electricity network cannot function if we don't agree on what voltage and what frequency and all of those things that we now take for granted, that we can just plug a device in power socket and it works. That requires a whole lot of standardization. I think some of this in the API world is happening around things like the Open API spec, like there was a standardization around API design. This is already done. Well, it's not fully done, but it's pretty mature. Announcing what are all your interfaces, like as an organization, how do you declare your interfaces? This is right now. There's kind of like everybody has a dev portal, and you can go into developer dots or APIs dots, .com. But if we're really thinking about this as a utility, I could imagine every website having some APIs. That is like, you have a commercial product, they have a couple of interfaces. Some of them might be human, might be people that are taking a call or doing support or whatever, maybe mediated through some sort of ticketing system or something like that. And then maybe that has a programmatic API. But how do you declare that? That is, I think, one of the frontiers. But I think the other aspect and I think this is where you're working, Alicia, is how do we all agree on a standard way of doing this thing? Like if you want to get like a higher volume mobile connection, how do you do that? And how do we do that in a standard way so that you don't need to have a device, or you don't need a separate app or some custom codes to make it work for your provider, and then as you go roaming, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So that's what you're working on, as far as I understand, right?
It's part of what I'm working on, and there's one kind of point of clarification that I want to make. That certainly I can hear my legal team in my head right now. It's specifications, not standardizations.
Oh, okay.
So we're working on maybe a standard set of specifications, API specifications within those bodies that are the same across telcos, so that it makes it easier for a developer to essentially plug and play. But I think, we're not doing it alone as telcos. You mentioned the different interfaces and like developer.verizon.com and, most telcos kind of having that same interface. But we're also working with some of the other industry players. So hyperscalers are making a play in this space. Obviously, aggregators already exist today. But there's been different announcements to kind of even reduce the friction further and make it easier for developers to use the same API across multiple telcos. And that's, not only within a geography, which is really important for B2B2C applications, but also across geographies, because you've got, and Josh, I'm stealing this directly from you, but you've got, a device manufacturer doesn't manufacture a device for use in just one geography.
Right.
They're going to ship potentially worldwide or to a handful of geographies. And so they don't want to have to hard code anything in like 30 times just to get, access to each of those telcos. So that's really what we're working on is making it easier for developers to access the telco network and really take advantage of it. And I think within telco, utility is kind of a bad word. We're always trying to avoid becoming a utility because we see ourselves as being able to provide much more. The telco network technologies are constantly evolving. 6G has already been worked on like for several years at this point, and we just launched 5G. So that's constantly evolving. And how do we take advantage of that? And what new applications and new technologies will that unlock for everyone? So we don't want to think of ourselves as a utility, and we don't want the APIs either to be a utility. They're really a gateway to leverage these powerful networks that we're constantly investing in and constantly improving.
And so in the technology of 5G SA core, it's very modern. It's a lot of the same components, maybe moved around. You might sit 50 miles away from where they used to sit. You might remove a letter from the acronym for it, but it's very heavy API driven. Now these different entities or services that are running in the network and enabling this service-based architecture and ability to change the state or change the behavior or alert a system or someone else about a change in behavior. That's all a big portion, and that's enabled in these new cores. And so we'll have hooks that perhaps we've always had access to as a carrier, but what if we can start exposing them a little bit easier now? We're designed from the beginning. And so now we can go in and build expose a layer for our product managers to go build on, and then out to those general interfaces that people see.
It's fascinating. Look, I've bumped into this. We don't want to be utility. I've bumped into that before. And to me, it feels very similar to this confusion. So I'm still under the influence of the talk I did at API Days, so bear with me a little bit. We organized the CXO long time ago in the Drupal community about products. So we had some really successful ones before that. And then we had this one about products, and it completely fell flat because basically this was an unconference. So it's like 2 days of in Rome, like awesome people, awesome location, really, really awesome. And it should have worked, but it didn't work because every single conversation, every single session we were going to do about products ended up in a conversation about, but what is a product really actually again? And there was like different definitions. There was whole domain model confusion that was completely sabotaging everything. So and I think something similar is under the hood here, because utility means something bad, because it means like there's no margins and people don't see us as differentiated anymore. But there's an other aspect to it, I think.
So in that idea of API as a product or not as something else, I think is thought of as one way maybe in the IoT space. I think Josh kind of described why that is. And you've got a closed system, everyone is authenticated, it's more mature, and you've got a whole suite of products behind that are also owned. Like Verizon has ThingSpace and all of these APIs. Whereas in this interoperable network API space that's new for telcos, there is that discussion of, is the API the product or is it an enabler? Like APIs aren't new, right? The API generally is quite mature. And if we look to the cloud space, I think that's a great place to look, because they've really, I think, maybe got it right. They use the APIs to enable access to their cloud services, right? They want to monetize their investment in cloud, which is not only a CapEx investment, but it's also a constant OpEx investment. They want to monetize that by making it easier to access all of the tools that they're putting on there. And I think that we should be thinking about that the same. We should be thinking about these APIs as a way to make it easier to access the network. It doesn't mean that the APIs themselves can't be monetized, but is that the definition of a product? Is a product something that's just monetized in itself, or can it be an enabler? So like Edge Discovery Service, an API that Verizon has already launched, helps you discover the closest AWS wavelength zone to the end user. That's free because we want people to use wavelength. We want to make it easier. We want to reduce the friction to using wavelength. And so I think that's how we should be thinking about it. But there's other APIs that might deliver a different type of service than are monetized, because it's an enhancement over maybe the standard kind of BAU that you would get. And then there's other, pieces of information that we provide, like device status, whether it's as much information as you would get on the ThingSpace platform, or whether it's as simple as the Kamara API that's out there today. I think both have that additional value and can be monetized, but they're still enabling use of the network.
I think it's the mindset more. So there's a clear, distinct product mindset that is distinct from project mindset, which is like, I'm just going to build this thing and I'm going to forget about it, and hopefully it stays up for, a couple of years, versus this is something that's critical infrastructure that we're going to keep on investing, and we know how we're making money here, and we have a very clear business reason to do this, and this is not just somebody's fancy that's getting deprecated and shelved like soon. I wonder, is there a utility mindset?
That's rare. In our world. Although it's funny enough, two things are getting deprecated. But so I think in the IoT space, we're a little bit closer to that, just because it's the nature of how we've been doing business. And we do have some monetized APIs that are a little bit different, that go much deeper into the network than you've ever been able to kind of go before. But they're still APIs, right? So it's not a massive cost to do business with us. But there is at some point you do get into this, what does it cost for me to run this infrastructure and support it and invest in it and keep it growing, versus, to your point, hey, it's really cool, we built this thing, let's move on to the next one. Like, it's a mixture of both. We're continuing to invest in infrastructure and gateways and APIs. There's pretty hyper focus on it right now, I would say, inside of Verizon.
In my talk, I keep coming back to it, but it's something I want to piece out, because I think it can help us. I believe it can help the industry forward. Well, that's a lot of hubris, but there's this project mindset, which is, it's a certain way of thinking, and it's a big advancement over just doing stuff without a project container. But then there's the evolved version, which is a product mindset, which is a huge iteration, like it's a huge next step after a project mindset. Is there a utility mindset that's different, where maybe what we're looking for is APIs in a utility mindset, but as products, where there's a lot of value, a lot more value than we've ever had before? Because right now, I have this, so I was saying before we started, we were doing this energy renovation. We got this ventilation system in our attic, and I'm scared of it because I'm operating it through a mobile app. And I'm worried when that company is going to decide that, that's, so long, thank you for all the fish, we stop maintaining this app. So I think that a product has a life cycle and is going to die at some point. And then you're out of luck, and now this thing is no longer maintained. So And I think that there's a distinction between the mindsets and the ability to, I think you can have both utility as the playing field on which you're playing that enables you to do things much more inexpensive, which opens up such a volume of traffic that actually it's a much better product, or a much better playing field to do products in. Is there something like that we can foresee and that maybe can help to trigger in the ecosystem, in the community? Is that maybe what you're working on, Alicia?
Can you describe what you mean by utility mindset? I don't think I'm quite.
I don't know yet. So I think
or like the difference between when you think of the product versus the utility.
So when you go from project to product, you're going from finite time. So like it's basically a project mindset is saying we're going to only spend so much time doing this thing, and we're going to control the costs and the resources we're going to use, and we're going to measure the outcomes. That's the difference from no projects, like the thing before project to project. When you go from project to product mindset, you're going to, okay, instead of having a finite timeline, we're going to have a life cycle, and we're going to make sure that there's ROI on this thing. And we're going to keep on investing as long as we have ROI, or we are expecting to have an ROI on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think when you go to utility, you're saying, okay, there's this standard playing field. This is never going to go away. These standards are there forever. This part is always going to keep working no matter what. And I don't know what is then the investment scenario, but maybe it is because this is so essential that you can't touch it, because if this falls away, everything falls apart. Maybe that's what actually it is that in our more and more connected society, we cannot live without these things. That maybe it's not even a question if there has to be ROI. There is social ROI and it has to happen. But these mindsets for the service or the type of service, the archetype, because APIs, and this is another confusion we have in our ecosystem, is that people, when you say API, often people think about the servers that are running the API. But that's not the API. The API itself is just a contract. It's saying, when I'm sending you information in this format, I'm going to get information in this format back. That is what the API really is. So the API itself doesn't cost anything, because it's just, actually, the more people use it, the more valuable it becomes, because it means that it's more devices will start using the same API more, it's this self-reinforcing network effect. Is there something, and so that's why I think that APIs really naturally, at least the protocol part, are a natural utility. Now, the products you build on top of that, that's another story. And maybe by separating these concepts, maybe they can also help us to change this mindset of this should be free. Maybe when we clearly delineate these two things, we can better explain, like, well, yes, it needs to become utility. We need to work together, because otherwise, there's not going to be enough demand to actually make a useful ecosystem. But we're going to make lots of money, because these are the products we're going to build on top of this stuff, and this is how we're going to do value-based selling in these areas. Like what today, like the value-based selling in telcos is about, sending SMSs, so many minutes of calls. People inherently believe in the value of those things and assign a much higher value to them than what currently the network traffic costs for those things.
I think on the ThingSpace side, we're there to the utility piece. I'll tell you why. So we do millions API transactions per month. That is a sign that people are doing business with us. Mm-hmm. Many of those are free APIs. We see it as table stakes just to be in the game. Hey, here's what the market is telling us, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that gets you really close to the full-on utility piece almost. Now, the difference for us is that you've got to have a business relationship with us. So you can't just go sign up and start pinging people's devices. And I think that's unique for us, because it's just how we kind of grew up in this space, and it's how customers want to do business with us. So it makes it a little bit easier for this utility idea to take hold when it's the market makes it easy to to build it that way. We're not doing everything in a vacuum. With that in mind, I think there's the best way to do it. And I think Verizon's done a great job of, it might be a little hard getting onboarded, but once you're onboarded, we're here to help you do as much as you possibly can. We want them to be successful, right? Because then they'll do more and more and more and more. To your point, my APIs are going to go up, and that's a great thing to have. And when there's some cool stuff that Alicia is getting really close to doing, that's going to kind of take that. It's going to be a new interface essentially for new developers. And that's the type of stuff that everybody's working on figuring out. Like, okay, we know there is utility for the end customer in this space. We know it is providing real business value, right? In the way of increasing security of transactions. Now, how do we do that? And not only how do we do it, but if I'm Toast or I'm MasterCard, I'm just throwing names out there. How do I consume that in England and France and the United States and Canada and Mexico? How do I perform that? How do I lower my risk through using carrier APIs in whatever country I'm in? And I think that's a very interesting question and effort.
And I think that gets also back to the security point that you made, that's a value that we as telcos offer more than, sometimes better than most everyone else out there.
Well, we're regulated, right? Like
we're regulated, but also it's such a huge, at least for Verizon, it's such a huge part of our brand. We have reports that we do on I think the DBI, where we talk about data breaches and different security and security threats out there. And that's a value that we can offer through our network. It is more trusted than most other sources out there.
Mm-hmm. So these are basically their capabilities, inherent capabilities that you had to build to be able to provide the service you're providing today, that you can now unbundle and provide as a separate capability to do new things with it. The value destroying part of utility is that people are not seeing the differentiation anymore. I heard the story, my wife told me this story. So she has a service in another country, and to be able to access that service, she needs to receive an SMS token. And the telco provider that company is working with has, for some reason, some crappy SMS service that is not going outside of the country borders, which means that she can't authenticate against that service and she can't access her service, which is ridiculous. And how do we make that transparent to customers? Like, okay, you can get your SMSs at 10% of the cost that it's in our service, but maybe they'll arrive and maybe not. That's
also APIs. I mean, like now you're getting into CPaaS, the communication platform as a service. So you think of like the aggregators like Twilio, Cinch, Infobip, Vonage. They all offer that. And there is different routing, and that's one of the pieces of value they provide is they get the best routing across any telco in the world or anyone that they have a contract with. And they can see that. And there are different delivery rates for each telco carrier and for each API call.
Yeah.
And that is an incredible, that's been around. Those standards SMS standards have existed for a long time. Those APIs have existed for a long time, these services, and there's still differentiation in the delivery. And so you can deliver behind the network. So there is absolutely differentiation that you can have, even though the API specification is the same. The API is just a gateway. You don't want to be in a house with 12 doors and each door has a different lock, and now you're carrying around 12 keys just to get into the closet in the bathroom and like the front. That's not useful to anyone. And I think if we can get outside of the mindset of API specifications being the same and therefore not having any value, if we can get outside of that, I think we can think more expansively and get back to the network still is the core of the value. The Verizon network is still what's providing that value. It's not the API. The API is how you access this incredible thing that we've built.
Do you think there's place for utility mindsets that does not mean that there's no differentiation.
I think in the network API space, we have to wait and see which ones of those are going to become that utility.
Mm-hmm.
It's so new that hardly any operators, I mean, in Kamara, there's no stable version yet for starters. So that's how new it is. We're still, some of them are on .4. So we have to wait for a stable version to really see what it's going to be. Some operators are putting these out there in private previews today. Some have, we've got our Edge Discovery service, which is our version, and it's going to look similar to what comes out of Kamara, but not exactly the same. So we'll see kind of which ones of these come out on top, but I think it's so early. We don't know which of those are going to be those building blocks that are so integral, that are like really the foundation of everything on top.
Thank you for going into this with me, because it's been a question that I've been really pondering. And I remember I had one conversation with somebody in the telco industry, and I was like, oh yeah, APIs are becoming utilities. And there was this disappointment on his face. And I was like, oh no, really? Don't tell my boss that this is becoming utility, because, we're not doing this to we want to differentiate. So it's just a really fertile grounds, I think.
I think there's still a lot of room.
Yeah.
I think there's years of room. And I don't think the infrastructure, on one hand, we get better at everything, but on the other hand, things still get more difficult. And so it's this constant thing of, but I think there's so much more room for growth and for new services. And a lot of them are going to have the utility view, right? And then that's just going to get pulled through because it's easy to use your service, right? It's just easy to do business. And then there's going to be some stuff that probably, is worth some type of monetization, but it's going to be at a point to where it doesn't stop the, it doesn't reduce the likelihood of someone using it.
My telephone subscription is a business subscription because, I want to be able to travel abroad and
travel.
That's a product. It's a product built on top of a bunch of utility services. So it is. And that's differentiated because it's in my country, this is the network that's known to be the business network. So all of this that is still in play. Maybe change tack a little bit, if you want to indulge me. It's like how does AI and LLMs change all of this? So what are you thinking?
You're going to get me going on edge computing very shortly.
Yes, I think so.
I'll let Joshua go first.
Yeah. So I think, after you make these investments, right, we spend a ton of money on spectrum. Mm-hmm. And, that's $50 billion before we have any technology on a stick. Right. So there's massive investments going on. And so I think there's always going to be this path to, what else can we build? What else can we build? What else can we build? And we did a really great, AI and ML and IoT event the other day. Just 3 hours with some of our data scientists, some of the product team, people like me, and just started ideating. Right. And what comes out of there is what we're doing today and either creating something new or doing something better that we're already doing. Right. And with the nature of how ubiquitous 5G is going to be with the edge computing nearby, you're going to start to see some really interesting things that just make life easier. Right now, it's, we're going to have a whole bunch of AI and ML buzzwords, which, let's talk about LLMs and them scraping my personal site later. But it's one of those things of it's going to be super dynamic and it's exciting. I think one of the first edge applications that we built, we threw the inference server at the edge so that, if the UE came in at under 85% confident, send it up to the edge, make the decision really quickly, and then get back with the decision. That's the basic stuff. I think we're going to see a ton of that in machines, and we're going to see a ton of that in automotive as well. And there is this constant piece, especially with machines, do I put more compute on board, or can I push some off and lower my BOM? Right. And it's that answer is going to be different for a lot of people, but at least now there's the choice, right? At least now we have this slider between where do I want compute and decisions to happen. And you've got a lot more options than you have in the past. But I think AI is going to be massive. Machine learning obviously still has long life ahead of it. But yeah. And then what happens when we put LLMs in chipsets?
When this whole LLM thing started blowing out of all the windows,
Yeah.
the first thing I was thinking, okay, so can you run this on your own device? Can you make it your own? There's a race, right? Yeah, and so one of what part of the announcement was that Gemini Nano is basically something that runs on your Android device.
Yeah.
Exciting, really exciting. Yeah.
Imagine your device is never asking you, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Or giving you the wrong search results. Or
sometimes my Google Home thinks I'm speaking to it in French.
Oh God!
And it responds in French, and I was like, "Oh, that's..."
Yeah, and also personal safety. I can have a core of the calculations happening on my device, the part that is close to me, and then some part that is not so close to me, I can move into the edge. That's fantastic. That's really, really exciting, interesting. Do you see this already happening, or how far are we from that?
We're not far. I would say, and this gets into the larger ecosystem, but those OEMs for smartphones, and then people like Qualcomm, who make probably the best modules and chipsets in the world. So just for anybody out there, you make a chipset, and then that gets put into a module, and then the module goes into the smartphone or computer or car or whatever. They have every vested interest into doing it. Right? There is no reason from a business standpoint that they wouldn't be doing that. And so I would directionally say it'll be faster than anybody thinks.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be it's going to make 5G more important. It's going to make these APIs more important. I don't know if anyone saw that there was a TV show, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but it takes place in a lot of different time zones. And in the futuristic time zone, which is really actually only 30 years from now, this woman lives in a condo building, and her whole place has a voice assistant, and she walks in and just talks to it, and it's kind of surrounds her and it controls everything in her home. And I think that is probably only 30 years out, or less than 30 years out, and some of it's here today. I think if people really wanted to invest in that in their home. And I think that's only going to become more and more ubiquitous. And I think having that connectivity everywhere and being able to give the control to the application developers about how they use network information, which is what these APIs do, is going to become more and more important as this technology becomes more ubiquitous. And it's going to rely even more on LLMs, which by definition are large. You cannot put the whole thing on one chip in a smartphone. It's not going to be like that. I also think about how these LLMs are learning, and AI generally is learning. There's a lot of different different models for AI learning, and one of them is federated. And I am not deep enough into LLMs and what everyone has been doing to know how each one is learning, but I would imagine that as you kind of separate them out into like what sits on the phone versus what's in the cloud or at an edge, that federated learning model is going to become more and more important. And it's going to need to be done also in real time as well. They're going to constantly be iterating. That speed at which everyone evolves their LLM is going to get faster and faster. And that's going to become maybe even a utility, dare I say. And so I think, that these APIs and edge computing together are going to become incredibly important for just the future of technology and AI.
There still needs to be a lot of thought when we go at that scale, but that scale is going to happen. right? It's absolutely going to happen. And so everybody just has to be mindful.
For me, this extension model that currently is proposed, so when you're talking APIs and LLMs, ChatGPT has this extension model where you can create an extension that makes your API available to the LLM, to ChatGPT. And I don't buy it because that's such a centralized model where there's the assumption that, we're all going to use this central, it's kind of like Google search, but I don't buy that because that's not the real promise of this artificial intelligence. It's not one supermind that knows everything and you have to say what you want it to have access to. I think it's 10 billion superminds or 100 billion superminds that have fluid intelligence that can bring more capacity on or reduce, but that are learning in their individual context and that are learning like right there where stuff is happening. It's like this local intelligence. And I think that's a lot more exciting, I think, than this centralized app store model that they're currently, or that's kind of being projected as this is the way it's going to go. I don't believe it. I think that this ties for me in with this idea of basically treating all the interfaces of the world the way that we're currently treating APIs. Or maybe all the interfaces become APIs. Potentially. Well, that's not going to happen. Like we'll probably, like an address is also an interface, but where just a very deliberate way of doing that and not only sticking, and maybe that's also where some of the value, the differentiation can be in, so there's the utility and then there's different interface products that live on top of the utility that are enabling different forms of value. So I think there's value both on top of the utility and below the utility. This is the same with electricity. You have, when you go into the electricity closets in your home, there's products that people have made to make electricity safe. There's products that are measuring how much electricity you're using. There's products that are now generating electricity on top of your roof and that are like orchestrating all of that. There's a whole bunch of products that are enabled in front of the utility. And then there's a whole bunch of products that are enabled behind the utility that are utilizing utility. So I think similar case is going to happen with APIs and with interfaces as a utility. But I don't believe that it's going to stay about developers. So yes, developers are the pioneers, but I think we need to set interfaces free so that everybody's
a developer.
Yeah.
Right. And we're getting closer to that. Yeah. Right. If you look at the studies for developers who have an AI assistant, it's like at the low end, it's 35%. At the high end, it's 65, 70% more efficient. And if we've seen anything, normally these things all get better. So we're on that road. Be writing great, immaculate code one day by not writing any code at all.
Yeah. We don't write code anymore. Just the system just does things for us.
Right.
Yeah.
So keep adding until you have an entire application, and you'll be good.
Well, this is the question: is it still applications we're going to have? Because application is a defined context.
Yeah.
An application context is a way to give trust about, when you're doing an API. When you're providing a key to an application, when Apple says like, yes, you can use my app store, or when you say like, yes, you can use my APIs, here's my key, what you're saying, I'm going to trust you Apple is going to review your app and see like you're not doing anything weird that you're not supposed to do. You will probably provide the API key and say like, as long as you're not doing anything weird, you're going to keep having access, but I'm going to cut you off if you do something weird. But right now that trust is given in the context of an application. But I think that the shift that's happening from API as a product to API as a utility is that trust is no longer in the context of an application, but that trust is now in the context of the network. Right. And where individual API calls are happening without having to be stuck inside of an app container. And that is what I think LLMs are enabling, is that you just like, can you do this calculation for me, please? And,
right.
and just goes and fetches you some edge computing.
Everything's going to be a Lambda. Yeah, and I think to the degree our network already works like that, right? So we have that portion. Now it's what is it going to make sense to expose and how to expose it to the interface. Now, whether or not those interfaces change and you use them applications or you just automate the heck out of it, it's still going to be there.
But it's really exciting. You're working on this really amazing futuristic stuff.
It's fun. I mean, we I think my team gets to work with e-bike manufacturers, dog collars, solar companies. We get to work with a ton in automotive as well. So it's always dynamic. And I think one of the cool things about IoT, it's very much a full stack. And when you look end to end, you're starting off in C and machine code, and then you're calling network APIs, and then you're eventually going to get to some front end. It's going to be in, JavaScript and HTML and CSS. And you're going to get to a back end and you're going to be writing to databases, or maybe they're databases that sit in memory, right? Because of the need. Maybe they're highly distributed. Maybe you put machine learning on the end device, on the UE, so that it sends less data. It's able to, run the sensors and then make a decision. Do I send an alert or not? And that's all the decision it has to make. So this interdisciplinary piece of IoT, I think, is still endlessly fascinating to nerds like me, but it's only going to be cooler because we're only going to be able to do more things.
Yeah.
And our customers are going to be able to do more things, right? It's like I'm always constantly looking for the builders, right? Like who is building something, because they're the ones who are going to care about the utility. They're going to care about the product. They're going to care about new features and services. And a lot of it is right now, especially in this 5G space, is, hey, I always wanted to build this, but I couldn't because of X, Y, or Z. 9 times out of 10, it's out of the network or latency. When you look in the actual utility space, being able to make decisions on closing reclosers or opening up different paths for electricity to flow, that has to be done in very, very real time, a real timeness to it. And in the past, the networks just couldn't handle it, right? But now you've got compute that's 20 to 100 milliseconds away round trip. Like, let's go for it. Like, let's go build, right? Let's make this thing more efficient for everybody.
Coming back to electricity again, actually, we've gone all the way to utility, and now we're going back because with green energy and with the need for local production and storage and so on, suddenly you cannot just purely rely on the network to solve these problems anymore. And we're actually like kind of almost reverting to some extent in this industrialization process. So it's going to be interesting to see, is that also what's going to happen in telco services? That we are new, really complex needs that are putting the network so much under strain that it just shifts some of those patterns, and that it's not just a dumb pipe anymore, because actually it has to be hyper intelligent because it's become so complex that otherwise it just falls apart.
And that's where some of this technology is coming from, is how do we run a network at peak efficiency? Some of that stuff's going to come out and be exposed in the APIs that Alicia's been talking about. But as the network has to get smarter, right? Because humans build more things, and we have more humans. And there are physical properties to RF, right? Like physics typically don't break down around this stuff, right? And some of this stuff is not just theoretical. Like it's real. And so we do have to be able to treat data according to its intent and need and importance. And that's just going to happen for sure.
Fascinating. Thank you, both of you. This has been amazing. Very, very deep. Really, I love this. So is there any last brain teaser or something you want to pitch to our audience that you think people should go and check out?
I'm trying to think. We got a couple of developer days that are going to be fun.
You should plug those. Where can people find more to participate in the Dev Days?
Right. So the next Dev Day is really going to be about Intelligent Rules Engine, which is a heavily telco piece about can you dynamically change your rate plan based on your usage for that month so that you don't go into overage? The second one is going to be about global IoT orchestration. So imagine using an eSIM and just calling an API to Verizon, and you can download a foreign carrier's profile to that SIM, and in a very programmatic way, be able to be very intelligent about where you're using it and your costs. So that's some of the blocking and tackling for us this year. But you can always find me out on LinkedIn, and I put all of our developer days out there. So we're excited. We're busy, Kristof.
Sounds like there's a lot of work. Again, thank you very much. This was awesome. And have a lovely rest of the day. Probably see you in Barcelona.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Good times. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Kristof.
That's it for this episode. This episode of the Resilience Podcast was brought to you by Pronovix. You can learn more about our company at pronovix.com. And thank you for listening. And until next week.